μαύρη κίτρινη φανέλα των γηπέδων αετός. Το όνομα σου είναι Μέγας, Αλεξανδρός ο τρομερός. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Μες στα γηπέδα σαρτίνι, τρέμουνε στο πέρασμά σου, κι όλοι οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουν το μεγάλο το όνομά σου. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα.
The dark clouds of World War II had merely passed a decade before, and the savage economic effects of the most destructive conflict in human history were still being felt across Europe. The town of Florina was not immune. By the mid-1950s, many of its 12,000 residents were looking abroad for hope, stability and opportunity. Many Florinians looked towards Australia as a potential new home, and a great many had elected to pack their belongings and begin the arduous 4-week ocean journey to commence their new lives in Melbourne, Victoria. Many Florinians would settle down in neighbouring Fitzroy, Northcote, Clifton Hill, and from there became popular gathering spots for many of these migrants. And it was from such humble beginnings that a football club was born, the mighty Alexander the Great. Few would have dreamed 60 years later that Heidelberg United Alexander Football Club would be recognised as a sporting giant on the Australian landscape. This is their story. In 1955, one Nicholas Moskantsis was the Lieutenant Colonel Director of the Thessaloniki Police. Now, he would go on to play a largely anonymous but nevertheless integral part in the establishment of Alexander the Great Soccer Club. His death in 1958, ironically the same year that Alexander played its first game, meant that he did not witness the formation of his vision. Some 30,000 people attended his funeral, and yet very few of them would ever know that it was he who asked fellow policeman Pavlos Economides to fulfil just one task.
The initial idea to create a Greek Macedonian soccer club in Melbourne came from Dikitis Moskondis, the commander of police in Thessaloniki. Well, it wasn't my dad who suggested the club, it was the commander. But my understanding from Mum is, so a bit prior to my father emigrating to Australia, and that was back in 1955, he had a meeting with the commander who explained to him that there was a political propaganda in Melbourne and a push for a Macedonian state, not part of Greece, which even to this day still exists. My father himself, he was unaware of what was happening here in Melbourne, and also the commander back then, advised him as a Macedonian soccer club with political leanings already established in Melbourne, and they were recruiting people that had immigrated from northern Greece. So at that stage, at that meeting, Moskondis suggested to my father that he get involved, work with relatives and friends, and help create a Greek Macedonian soccer club. And he even proposed the name Megas Alexandros, knowing that Greek Macedonians would get behind it.
Το 1958, τέλη του 1958, και εκεί που βγαίναμε σε διάφορα μέρη, μου λέει μία ημέρα πάμε στον Αλέξανδρο. Και λέω, γιατί όχι. Και πήγαμε στον Αλέξανδρο και ο Παύλος ενθουσιασμένος και εγώ, γιατί μου άρεσε και εμένα το ποδόσφαιρο και από την Ελλάδα. Και προς το τέλος έρχεται, αφού τελείωσε ο αγώνας, μετά από λίγο έρχεται ο Νίκος ο Ρωμανίδης. Και κάτι λέγανε με τον άντρα μου, με τον αρμονιαστικό μου τότε. Και λέω, τι λέγατε τόσα με τον Νίκο? Εν τω μεταξύ εγώ τον Νίκο τον γνώριζα από το γυμνάσιο στη Φλόρινα, αλλά εξ αποστάσεως, ήξερα την αδερφή του και τον μικρό του. Και μου λέει, θα σου τα πω όταν φύγω. Και ξανά το ρώτησα και λέει, να σου πω πώς έχουν τα πράγματα. Μου λέει, ξέρεις ότι έκανα αστυνομικό στην Ελλάδα, στη Θεσσαλονίκη. Λέει, εκεί είχα διευθυντή τον Μοσχοντή, τον Νίκο Μοσχοντή. Και λέει, όταν ήταν ο καιρός για να έρθω στην Αυστραλία, πέρασα από τον Νίκο να τον αποχαιρετήσω και να τα πούμε, που τόσο καιρό ήταν στη Φλόρινα. Και τότε ο Νίκος μου λέει, Παύλε, τώρα που πας στην Αυστραλία θα σε παρακαλέσω πάρα πολύ και σου ζητώ να κάνεις αυτό το πράγμα που θα σε ρωτήσω. Και τότε άρχισε και του έλεγε ότι στην Αυστραλία υπάρχει μία προπαγάνδα από τους Μακεδόνες, τους λεγόμενους σκέτους Μακεδόνες και όχι Ελληνομακεδόνες, και έχουν κάνει μία ομάδα που την ονόμασαν Μασεδόνια. Και λέει, εσύ σε παρακαλώ πολύ θα κάνεις, αλλά πολύ να μην σε καταλάβει κανένας, γιατί πρώτα τον ρώτησε τι δουλειά θα κάνει, γιατί ήξερε που είναι ράφτης. Και λέει, θα εξασκήσω το επάγγελμα του ράφτη, λέει, και θα ανοίξω κατόπιν μαγαζί. Και λέει, εφόσον έτσι έχουν τα πράγματα, πρόσεξε, δεν θέλω να σου κάνουν κακό. Θα κάνεις νυμφάλαια τα πράγματα, λέει, όχι να εγώ θα κάνω αυτό, εγώ εκείνο. Και τότε ο Παύλος τον γνώριζε τον Νίκο από εκεί, και ο Νίκος είχε παίξει στην Πρέστον, και από εκεί πριν πάει στο Πρέστον πήγε ο Νίκος και έπαιζε σε μία ομάδα που τη λέγανε Έοντα, και εκεί τον αποκαλούσαν Βούλγαρο. Και τότε ο Νίκος Μακεδονίας του λέει, θα πάω στο Πρέστον. Και όταν είδε ο Νίκος, γνώριζε αυτό το ιδίωμα το μακεδονικό, το μιλούσε παρόλο που ήταν πόντιος, και κατάλαβε ότι δεν άρχιζαν και μιλούσαν προπαγανδιστικά ότι η Μακεδονία δεν είναι ελληνική και τα κάτωθη. Τότε ο Παύλος όταν είδε ο Νίκος έτσι, θα σου πω τι πρέπει να γίνει, αλλά εγώ δεν μπορώ να πω σε κανέναν, όπως μου είπε ο Μοσχοντής, λέει, μη μου κάνουν κακό, εγώ δεν θα φαίνομαι, λέει, αλλά εσύ θα μάσεις τους παίχτες και να κάνεις μία ομάδα που να λέγεται Αλέξανδρος. Και τότε, λέει, οι Μακεδόνες, οι Έλληνες Μακεδόνες της παροικίας θα σας ακολουθήσουν. Και όπως έγινε ο Αλέξανδρος, και συνέχεια ο Παύλος με τον Νίκο τα λέγανε πάντα, και όπως ξέρετε έτσι ήταν η αρχή του Αλεξάνδρου. Δεν ήταν ιδέα του Παύλου.
Well, that history all started back with my grandfather, Marco Economidis, back 60 years ago. So Marco with Paul Economidis and Nick Ramanidis started it all at Heidelberg, and that's 60 years ago. And that's where the connection all started. And my grandmother and all the families got together at all these special occasions, and it was a big family gathering with all these families, and yeah, it was just fantastic to be associated with and having that legacy. So, and then from there, my father came on board, and he was one of the goalkeepers at Heidelberg, and And then from there, my uncle Chris Economides started, and many years later, I played a few games for the club.
Dad spoke about the club very fondly. The club held a very special place in his heart. It was almost symbolic of the passion that he had for a lot of issues, and a lot of the club had a special meaning to him. It had a special meaning to him. So he did share a lot of stories. Even the forming of the club, the forming of the club originally. The way it went was, Dad was here from Greece, of course. He was a soccer player, was a football player, was looking for a club to play. He found himself at one of the Greek clubs of the time. I'm not sure how many Greek clubs there were at the time. I believe there were 3 or 4. I don't know. But he found himself playing at Hellenic. He wasn't happy at Hellenic. He didn't feel like he fitted in. So he moved from Hellenic and went and trained at Preston Makedonia, which was a newly formed club. And Dad went there thinking, it's Macedonia, it's a Greek club. So when he went there and he had a training session with them, he realised that it's in fact not a Greek club. So he basically packed his bags and walked away from that club. So he was left a little bit despondent as to where he should be playing, what he should do. At around that same time, his very, very good friend Pavlos Economides received a phone call from Greece, from one of his former associates in Greece. His former associate conveyed to him the concern that there was brewing in Greece regarding a club in Australia called Preston Makedonia, and obviously the political issues at the time. And he encouraged Pavlos Economides to form a club of his own that was for Greek Macedonians. So Pavlos called my father, conveyed to him the message, Dad being the soccer player and Dad having all the connections in the soccer community, other players, etc. And together they said, yes, let's form this club. The problem was that neither of them spoke English very well at the time. So Pavlos then called his cousin, who had been in Australia for quite some time prior to that. He'd been in Australia for 10, 20 odd years. I'm not sure how long, but a significant time longer. So he called his cousin Marcos Economides, and the three of them championed the cause.
Well, it was my understanding is when he came here. So one of the key figures in the establishment of the club was Nick Romanides. That was a close friend of his, from the same village in Greece, and obviously there was a lot of other senior members of the Florinian community was the key founders of the club that were involved to get it set up. So I think at that stage, Nick, from my mother's time, was playing for a Greek club in Melbourne called Iandas, and he was being teased about being a Bulgarian. And he was one of the primary drivers very early on that started getting momentum towards setting up Alexandros.
The club was formed by 4 people. Nick Romanides was one of them, Paul Economides, Mark Economides, and George Banitskas. Now, they were the 4 people that started the club. Paul Economides had a business in Brunswick Street, and Mark was his uncle, and he had a little grocery shop next door to him. Paul was a detective in Thessaloniki before he came here, and he received a phone call from his boss from Thessaloniki. He said that, look, there's a problem in Australia about the Macedonian thing. He said there's a club there, they called it the Macedonian Soccer Club, but they named it in the Yugoslav name. And he said, we've got to do something about that to keep, because all our people from the villages and things, they go towards that club. They go and support that club. We've got to bring those people back.
So my understanding is during that time, then afterwards in '58, the members of the Clifton Hill Social Club went on to establish the actual club. And again, Nick there was very instrumental in getting players and recruiting players into the club. And then the rest, from there, the story. All the other passionate founding members worked really hard to ensure that it's a successful club.
Well, we came here in 1956, and from 56 till 58 we used to go to Clifton Hill. And then when my father and Marco Economidis and George Banitskas, they were committee of the Clifton Hill Social Club, they decided to make this soccer club, which we named it, I named it Alexander. The reason that I named it Alexander is because I used to follow the Alexander Soccer Club in Florida, and they had the black and yellow colours. Everything that happened, it did happen at my place in Fairfield, as you know. But the person who was sort of in charge, it was Marcos Economidis. He was more educated than my father and George Banitskas, and he could speak English very well, so he was in charge.
Το όνομα αντίδερη που βάλαμε και το όνομα το έβαλε ο Ρακοβαλής ο Κον. Το Ρακοβαλή το έδωσε ο Κον ο Ρακοβαλής, ο Κωστάκης, στο σπίτι του Τρίφουνα. Δηλαδή έχω ακούσει τώρα κάτι πράγματα που δεν μου αρέσουν καθόλου, να τα λέμε όπως είναι, όχι όπως τα θέλουμε. Οι ιδρυτές ήταν αυτοί, αυτό να το θυμάστε ρε παιδιά, οι ιδρυτές ήταν αυτοί οι τρεις ανθρώποι. Το Social Club είχε κι άλλους που δουλέψαν μαζί με τον Τρίφουνα και με τον Μάρκο και με τους άλλους, αλλά ήταν από φαρμαδόροι, ήταν από εδώ και από εκεί, αλλά ήταν πολλοί. Αυτό ήταν το Social Club. Το Soccer Club, ό,τι αφορούσε το Soccer Club μετά, όταν έγινε Soccer Club, αυτό ήταν από τους τρεις ανθρώπους. Μπανίτσκας πρόεδρος, Μάρκος Οικονομής γραμματέας, Τρίφου Ρακοβαλής ταμείας. Τώρα τι ακούω, για μένα αυτά είναι, τι να σου πω, δηλαδή απαράδεκτα. Αυτούς γνώρισα εγώ.
There's no doubt Clifton Hill Social Club played a role. There's no doubt. There's no denying that. There's no denying that others played a role as well. You can't just form a club out of the blue without having a community of people. The exact role that they played, look, they came in afterwards. They came in at the request of the three founders.
Mark was the only person that can speak English. My brother-in-law Paul couldn't speak English. George couldn't speak English. But Mark didn't want to be the president. He had his business. He didn't want to get heavily involved, but he wanted to be the secretary. So they said to George Banitskas, you take over the presidency.
The club's story has its origins back in 1955, following that fateful meeting between Nikos Moskantsis and Pavlos Economidis. Pavlos was a highly respected tailor by trade in Melbourne by 1958, but had previously been a highly decorated detective back in Greece. Pavlos divulged the contents of the conversations with his former boss to his best friend Nick Romanidis, and about the need to establish a social soccer club that would be truly representative of Northern Greeks. According to a 1998 newspaper interview given by Nick Romanidis, the early discussions to form a club took place at Pavlos Economidis' tailor shop in Smith Street, Fitzroy. Subsequent meetings would continue to be held at the shops of Pavlos and Marcos, at the Clifton Hill Social Club headquarters and the residence of Trifon Rakavalis. Of concern to both men was the rise of Preston Makedonia, a club not recognised by Greece as being truly representative of the Northern Greek diaspora. Despite some support of Preston as a club that identified itself with the indigenous people of Northern Greece, there were conflicting views. Nick Romanidis was subjected to verbal abuse while playing for Yarra Park by members of the Greek community at the club because he was a Northern Greek. The term vulgari was hurled at him. Left feeling frustrated and angry when the discussion arose with Pavlos, it turned out to be one of forming a soccer club that would be a vehicle as a social club for Northern Greeks in Melbourne. History shows that this conversation will also bring together the likes of Markos Economidis, George Benishkas and Trifon Rakavalis. These 5 great men and many others would all play pivotal roles in the initial creation of Alexander the Great Soccer Club. Together with the Clifton Hill Social Club, they would create a truly representative club for Northern Greeks here in Melbourne. The club's name, which to this day remains famous and is synonymous with sporting success on the Australian landscape, was one of several considered. The likes of Hellenic, Pan-Hellenic and Macedonia were contenders for a time, but the one that most excited a young Con Rakavalis was Alexander the Great Soccer Club. Of course, Alexander the Great was a romantic nod to a club back home in the mother country in Florina, Greece, which also shared the same vibrant yellow and black colours. Con Rakavalis, son of Trifon, would go on to represent Alexander proudly for almost a decade as a player before later becoming a board member. Nick Romanides played for the club until 1963 and would best serve in an instrumental role in recruiting many fine, famous players to the club in its formative years. Pavlos Economidis, instrumental in driving the initial enthusiasm to help the formation of the club, remained a key figure behind the scenes. George Benishkas was appointed the club's first president, and along with his loving wife and family, he was a tireless organiser behind the scenes. Indeed, to this very day, he has an undying passion and love for the club. Markos Economidis would be the club's first secretary, with his business acumen an invaluable asset to the club in its infancy. Now, the Clifton Hill Social Club would become the primary support of Alexander in the early years, providing funding and administrative support. The members of the Clifton Hill Social Club membership would form the very first committee of Alexander the Great Soccer Club. Such was the influence of the Clifton Hill Social Club. Their name was enshrined in the club's early constitution, giving it controlling rights. The club's formation is best summarised in a speech given by Markos Economidis in 1984 at a celebration of the club's 25th anniversary. And I quote, "Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to be here tonight to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Heidelberg United Alexander Soccer Club. As I am one of the founders, I will give you a bit of history. The club started and was formed in the middle of 1958, on the 12th of May 1958. In 1959, the club was officially formed by a community in those years known as the Community of Clifton Hill. I want to thank them for their financial support. Without their support, we would not have succeeded in forming the soccer club. I want to thank all my colleagues in helping me form the club, especially George Benishkas and Trifon Rakavalis, and many others, too many to mention. As I said before, the club was officially formed in 1959 and we applied for affiliation with the then known VASFA. But our application was unsuccessful. Instead of disbanding, we continued to prove that we are willing and will succeed. So during 1959, we played friendly games throughout the season. In 1960, we reapplied and the club was affiliated and we played in the provisional 4th division. We won the championship with a massive score of 114 goals for. And we were promoted to the 2nd Division North. Not only that, we became champions again, but also won the Lilydale Cup in the same year and played in the quarterfinals of the Doherty Cup, losing to State League club George Cross 5-2 at Olympic Village. Does anybody know where that is? It's our home ground now, thanks to the Mayor and the Committee of Heidelberg for having faith in us, and we will do our best to keep the name at the top. Also, I want to thank all the players that wore the yellow and black colours, especially Nick Romanidis, who could not be present tonight and who helped find the first 11, and he was one of them. He was such a good player. If the opposition was better, he used to chop them down. And I want to thank all the committees after me that continued to support the club and extend the foundations to the future committees to do the same. And more to the present committee, thank you for having us. Let's enjoy ourselves. Thank you. So reflecting on that speech way back in 1984, interesting to note the emphasis on the contributions of George Vanishkas, Trifon Rakavalis and Nick Romanidis in their contributions in getting together, bringing together the very first team to represent Alexander the Great all those years ago.
Well, my grandfather started the club, so it means so much to me and the family, and you know, it's sadly enough my grandfather isn't here, and it's pretty emotional, you know, thinking about it. And
Dad was a very proud man, but he was also a very quiet man. He didn't help form the club with his two friends to have boasting rights that he formed the club purely because he felt that he had to. He felt that it was his duty as a Greek to do so. So although I'm proud of the club as Dad was, very proud of the club, and I always will be, at the same time I'm just happy to be a part of it and just sit in the crowd just like everybody else, because the reality is it's all about club. I mean, the club's here for everyone. It's here for a reason. It was formed for a reason, and we all share that same passion. It was Dad's passion. Didn't do it for the glory. He did it for his passion. To an extent, it's very much so my passion. I have my own political views, of course, and that's part of the reason that I love the club. Of course, I'm proud of my father's achievements, but again, the club is everybody's club.
I'm very proud. I mean, you asked me a question before, how did I feel with my father's involvement with the club? Well, you know, every son wants to make their parents proud, and I think I made my father proud by having the name and playing in the soccer club that they worked hard to establish. And that's, my dad was a man of few words, very shy, but you know, the love was there and the respect was there. You know, it was a good feeling.
Μαύρη κίτρινη φανέλα των γηπέδων αετός. Το όνομα σου είναι Μέγα, Αλεξανδρός ο τρομερός. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Στα γηπέδα σ' αυτήν κρέμουνε στο πέρασμά σου κι όλοι οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουν το μεγάλο το όνομά σου. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Ο αγώνας ξεκινάει και ο ρεφέρι σφυρίζει, η ομάδα κατεβαίνει και τη νίκη μας χαρίζει. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λαχτάρα. κίτρινη φανέλα, τον γήπεδο να ετός, το όνομα σου είναι Μέγα, Αλεξανδρός ο τρομερός. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λατάρα. Αλέξανδρε, Αλέξανδρε, μεγάλη μας ομάδα, οι φίλαθλοι φωνάζουμε λατάρα.